came out here, and then somebody talked about bathhouses. And then they started explaining bathhouses. And I consider myself very liberal sexually, but I have to say, I was surprised. Is that a good term? Because at some of the things that were going on there. And it seemed that obviously, well, what I found out that was very clear also, that as this epidemic was moving along, that probably 5, maybe max 10% of the gay population frequented them on any regular basis. So 90 or 95% of the people, gay men in San Francisco, didn't go there regularly. And I was, at the time, obviously it was very clear, if you have multiple partners, I mean, it's a simple epidemiologic thing. You have many exposures, your chance of getting infected, whether you're drinking water from the bad pump with, you know, what am I thinking? It's cholera. Thank you. See, I need my youngster here to. And so, obviously, there were multiple exposures, and there were multiple exposures in some of the very riskiest, anal sex, obviously, being one of the more risky things. What I was hoping to do, I thought we needed to change behavior in the bathhouses. And if we couldn't change behavior, I thought we probably should close them. But I didn't want to close them as the police department. And by the way, the regulations were the police department. We inspected them for the police department, but it was not under the health department. And so I was looking to the gay community to do something about it. And I don't know how many of you know or heard of the Midnight Sun Bar.
Never heard of it.
Well, I guess a lot of you know. It's still there. It's still there. Well, the Midnight Sun Bar was one of several bars that had only one entrance. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you have a fire in a place with only one exit and that gets blocked, you're in trouble. And I think there was some involvement in the community to get some of these people and the person who owned the Midnight Sun to put another entrance. Didn't do it. So what did they do? They set up a table with a fire door in front, and I don't know if it was overnight, but very quickly, rear entrance was put in. So I was hoping that what I wanted to do, if we were going to do something with the bathhouses, would make it not a police action, but an educational moment. Because I really wanted it to be something supported, the action supported by the gay community, not just the health department coming in there. And let me tell you, a lot of people from the gay community came to me and said, we've got to do something about the bathhouses. We've got to close them. And people were saying to me, you know, and some physicians, almost every one of my patients was positive as we're going to the bathhouse. So again, as I say, it didn't take a rocket scientist to know that this was an area that needed attention. I tried working with the bathhouse owners. Didn't get very far with that at all. And I may be harsh, I don't know if there's anybody here from there, but these were money-making operations. Very, very much money-making operations. Mayor Feinstein wanted them closed day one. And as a political operative in San Francisco told me once, why didn't you, or asked me once, why didn't you just do what the mayor wanted done? And I said, well, she doesn't need me. If she wants to just tell somebody what to do, she doesn't need someone coming in with a public health experience. My role was to look at the public health issues and make sure that we did the right thing. And I look at public health much as you guys look at your patient. You know, the community is the individual. And I don't want to have successful surgery and the patient die. I don't want to do something for the heart and then have liver failure. So what I was hoping to do was not just change behavior in the bathhouses, but change behavior across the community. And again, if we were seen as the police rather than the partners, we weren't going to be able to get that done. And interestingly enough, through, I think, the health department, through many gay organizations, getting the word out, obviously the death and dying having something to do with it, the rectal gonorrhea rate went right down. And I used the rectal gonorrhea rate because we didn't have the ELISA test then, and that was sort of a marker for that. Well, Mayor Feinstein wanted them closed immediately. In fact, one of the things she says, if it saves one life, it's worth it. And I said, not if it causes the deaths of many others. And the pressure was such that she even brought in the medical directors of all the hospitals to meet with me, to talk to me about closing them down. And of course, they were medical directors, not public health directors. The press, depending whether it was the gay press, or the straight press, depending on what state, it was probably the most contentious time that I've ever spent. Randy Schiltz, a name that may be familiar to you, was writing. Randy and I got along fairly well, except that Randy, from the beginning, wanted the bathhouses closed. And article after article that he wrote, I would call up his editor and say, would you please put Randy on the editorial page? He's commenting. Like the health education program for the health department, which by the way was the first in the world that took place. I'm not saying the greatest, but it was one of them. He hadn't even read it, but said it was a lackluster program. Now, I wouldn't mind it if he said, Joe Jones says it's a lackluster program. But he would say, so finally, so I cut Randy off. He went to the mayor and he said, I can't get in to see Silverman. That's up to you and him. He came to me and I said, I'd love to have you say nothing but good stuff about me, but just some balance. So he wrote me a very nice note, said he was sorry. I said, fine. And so we worked together, but when he was writing the book, my wife said, don't talk to him. I said, gotta talk to him. And of the book, I thought was pretty good. By the way, the movie, which I don't know how many of you saw on the band play. Well, I just want to let you know there are 3 scenes where I'm depicted in there, and not one of them took place like you saw it there. And I'll mention it when we get to some of the others. On March 27th, in 1984, I received a letter from a man sitting right over there, Mark Poet, stating that the gay leadership was going to support closure. What I also found out was that Larry Littlejohn was planning to have an initiative or a referendum, or whatever the hell you call it, on the ballot for everyone to vote on. And let me tell you, again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that that would have passed to close the bathhouse. And of course, I thought that was a horrible way of going about it, and so did the leaders of the gay community. And there was a meeting, and I'm putting some names, and these are Mark will remember: Bob Bolin, Rick Andrews, Steve Morin, Bob Scott, Carol Migden, Bill Krause, Dick Pavage, Law Wilson, Arthur Lazare, and Frank Robinson were at this meeting. So I got this letter and I said, hallelujah. Just what I've been looking for, getting the support of the gay community. Now, I've obviously made a number of mistakes as Director of Health. The biggest one was deciding, calling a press conference. Actually, the one before that was telling the mayor I was going to close it. Calling a press conference. The night before I called the press conference, I met down at Valencia Rose. And I got there, and I'm pretty sure I was the only straight guy there, my wife with me. And to tell you, I felt somewhat naked standing up there, and I got pilloried. But some of the things that came out were very interesting. One man said, we were talking about putting up signs in bathhouses and stuff like that. He says, putting up signs in a bathhouse, talking about safe sex, is like putting up a sign that sugar is bad for you in a candy store. And I hadn't thought about it at the time, but you know, it's almost like the thing on the pack of cigarettes. Once you got the pack in your hand, probably isn't going to do too much to dissuade you from having a cigarette. And a friend of mine, who by the way came to me in tears saying, you've got to do something about the bathhouses. You've got to close the bathhouses. Everyone that I'm visiting now that's dying or has already died, that's where they got exposed. So at that meeting at the Valencia Rose, people were getting up, and I'm waiting for him, who's sitting there, and no, you didn't go, which did not please me too much. That's why I was a little bit naked there. He got up, and I'm sitting back waiting for this, and he says, what needs to be done little bit of a pregnant pause there, is we ought to put windows on the doors of the private rooms. And when that happened, I can't tell you what happened, you know. Prior to that, I should say, I got a call from Cleve Jones, who most of you know. And I worked with Cleve when he was an administrative assistant to Art Agnos at the Assembly. And he was someone that sort of bounced ideas off, and he thought the bathhouses should be closed. But then he calls me up and he says, let me tell you something, Merv. If you close the bathhouses, I'm going to man the barricades. And I'm thinking, wait, what the hell are you talking about? And he said, well, and this was the argument that I think was very persuasive. If you, the government, close the bathhouses in the most tolerant city, the most liberal city, what's that message going to do for sodomy laws or other repressive laws against the gay community? Very persuasive argument. So this is what I was up against. But I had announced this press conference. So Randy is actually the one who called and said, there's been a death threat. We had the chief of police come and fit me with my own little vest. And I went into this press conference knowing that I wasn't going to close the bathhouses because A, almost everyone on the list of that letter took their names off. Another naked feeling at that time. And in fact, before I went into that press conference, and after meeting with Diane, a happy camper, she was not, and I had met with the city attorney, and he said, really, Merv, you can't do that unless you have evidence that you can cite and say, you know, these baths are bad because of A, B, C, D, or E. So I met with the committee that was meeting in my room waiting for me to go out to the press conference. Paul Wolverding, Don Abrams, Bob Bolden, Rick Andrews, David Kessler, Andrew Moss, Dr. Cherney, Steve Moran, Robert Scott, Leon McCusick, Dick Papich, Bill Krause, Gary Titus, Don Turner, who's a PWA, and Don Arden. I took a straw vote just to see what the hell. I said, they already knew I was going in and not say I was going to close. Yes, Paul, Don, Andrew, Dana, Krause, and Papich said yes. Kessler, Bolin, Andrews, Turner, McCusick said no. And there were a few others that I don't have all that there. Now, what was interesting is the movie, the band played on, showed me sitting with Krause at the front of the room with this audience, and I'm taking a vote of guys in towels standing there, no guys in towels, to see whether I should close the bathhouse. And when I walked into that room, which is my meeting room on the 3rd floor of the health department, it was surreal. It was like some, I don't even know what kind of movie I could tell you about. I went in, and usually I know a lot, knew the press was looking at. I was just sort of going down. It was a blur, although in the blur I saw towels. Wasn't quite sure what that was. And of course got up and basically said, I don't know what you expected, but I'm not closing him down. I need more medical and legal advice. And then I walked out of there. But it was what I call my non-press conference. And then you place those regulations on them. And then if they violate the regulations, then it's like a restaurant that violates the regulations for restaurants. Then you can go in and close them. So we decided to have and they also said right now probably closing them any other way would be illegal. You'd have a legal challenge. I had a 6-hour facilitated meeting. I brought in a facilitator so I wouldn't, maybe move things in a certain direction. Jim Kern, who was the CDC AIDS guy, Jim Chin, who was the head of infectious disease at the State Department of Health, Merle Sandy, Paul Wolverding, Don Abrams, Glenn Molyneux from the president of the Medical Society, Mark, Bob Bolden, Rick Andrews, Leon McCusick, Andrew Moss, and Dean Eckenberg, who was my epidemiologist. After a lively debate, the decision was made that we'd have regulations, no sex between, basically no penetrative sex between partners. Now what was left unsaid, because I wasn't going to get up and talk about masturbation as a director of health, was that mutual masturbation could go on. But the reason why I was saying no penetrative sex, and what happened, which you'll hear in a few minutes about what came down from the judge, is you want to invade privacy. How do I know that two guys who are having sex are having it safely? Do you push them apart, separate them. I mean, I'm not sure how you do that to see whether they're wearing a condom, one's wearing a condom, putting it over. I mean, you talk about invasion of privacy, it just wouldn't work. So the only way you could really do it is to say these could be social places, and as I say, unsaid, mutual masturbation places, but you weren't going to have penetrative sex. Well, when I got ready to do the press conference on that, a number of the advisors backed off on that. And on the 9th, I announced the regulation. I also tried to get the licensing from the police department to the health department. This didn't make any sense there. And then once it's in the health department, we could put forward these things. Harry Britt introduced this, then he and Feinstein opposed it. Now, I'm going to be very, very frank with you. I was worried that Harry Britt's balls were getting rubbed very, very roughly. Because when you go back over the fence, back and forth, and the fence gets there, you start getting excoriation and things like that. He was for it, he opposed it. He was for closure of the bathhouse, he opposed it. Then he was for it. Feinstein was also for it, and then she opposed it. And then when these things were going to be brought up before the police hearing or whatever it was, she canceled the hearing. And by the way, we're getting very close to the Democratic National Convention here, which obviously adds all kinds of political overtones. The mayor had undercover inspectors, cops, go into the bathhouses, unbeknownst to me, and went into 30, I think, gay and straight facilities, and also told the political report, so anyway, so sent them in. She comes to me and she hands me this document. Can you see what they're doing in there? Of course, I knew what you guys were doing, or some of you were doing in there, but the point was, the point to me was, it wasn't what was being done in there, except what was being done in there that was at high risk. There was a lot of things going on in there that were very troubling to her, which really didn't have anything to do with the high-risk activities. There was a big reaction in this community from that. She was riding with a political reporter in Washington. She was being thought of as a possible vice presidential candidate. Ferraro became the candidate. She was saying, if these were heterosexual bathhouses, Silverman would have closed them earlier. And she was absolutely right. I would have. There wasn't, there wasn't the overtones, there wasn't the issues surrounding bathhouses and the roles that they played earlier, and to some extent still played in '84. In the middle of '84, a poll showed that there was a 90% awareness of probable causes of AIDS in the gay community. In short, the gay community knew what caused AIDS and knew how to protect themselves from it. I was unable to get any consistent action or changes in the bathhouses. They said they were doing stuff, but didn't seem to be. The science was in on the etiology, the spread, the necessary preventive actions, and it was clear at that time that the gay community was not going to initiate any action against the facility. And I felt, while the city was spending millions, as I said, about $8 million, trying to control the disease and provide for those infected, I felt I could no longer ignore these facilities that were licensed by the city and profiting from the promotion and facilitation of activities known to spread the disease. I had them inspected. I had to send people in because they had to document what was going on. And on October 9th, I held a press conference and announced the closure of 14 establishments. And I have to say something. Between the March issue and the non-press conference that I called and this one, there was so much dialogue that the attitudes in the gay community were changing. I would say back in March or April, probably 70 or 80% of the gay community was opposed, and I may be wrong because it's only based on stuff that came in. When I decided to close them, I think 60% of the gay community said, the mountain had become a molehill. So I announced the closure. What we did is we posted on the doors of 14 establishments closure notices. They reopened city attorney's office filed suit, and the court issued a temporary restraining order. Now, Judge Roy Wonder, on November 28th, issued rules that were almost identical to the regulations that I had tried to promulgate, except that they were going to say that people inside the bathhouse, in other words, who were running the bathhouse, had to inspect every 20 minutes or so to see what the activity was. And if it was bad activity, they were supposed to report it. I mean, the whole thing did not make a lot of sense, to tell you the truth. And things got changed somewhat after that. But they closed. I think a couple reopened. Most of them ended up closing because the business just wasn't there. And I guess the final point I'd like to make is to have you all forget about the AIDS epidemic the way it was. The epidemic hits today. There are no bathhouses. You're in San Francisco. The epidemic is going through the gay community, ravaging it as it did. And someone says, I think I want to open a bathhouse with these activities going on. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I wonder how many of you would say, yeah, let's open one of those. And so, as I say, I wasn't trying to stand here to defend myself. I wanted to try and give you a sense of what was going on. I would say, without fear of contradiction, in the early years, I don't think any of us knew what the hell we were doing. What was unique to me was that, and I'm sure most of you who were here then, the patients knew as much as you did. And one of the things, I think several things came from this. One is what I was trying to lecture. I used to give lectures to the medical groups and all about creating a partnership between the patient and the doctor instead of the top down, which is pretty much the way I was educated. I think AIDS has done that because you have the patient who knew as much as you did, or somewhat, and so you worked together, plus neither of you had any answers in those days. So I think that was a positive thing. I also think that was positive in my estimation. I think homophobia came down as a result. If any good could come of such a horrible disease. I think when people outside the gay community saw the suffering, but saw the support, and saw what people were doing. I'll never forget, there was